Hi, welcome to Week in Review, our Sunday afternoon program. And the question today, should we pack for Perth? Let's Pretoria maybe, I don't know. But we're going to have a very interesting discussion on that because of a good, very interesting new book that's just come out. But before that, there's been a result in America, if you don't know it yet. And we're talking to Theo Venter. He's from the Potch Business School. He's been a political analyst for many years and has always had, as long as I've known him, a very specific interest in American politics. And Theo, good afternoon. Welcome.
Hello, Kobus, and thank you for the invite.
A couple of days ago, most people were still holding their breath, thinking, well, this is going to be very close, and many people actually still thought that Trump would make it. Was it a surprise to you?
In a sense, it was a surprise. I've been following presidential elections ever since Jimmy Carter. And in the period 80 to 82, I was in the US witnessing some of these elections, and again, one or two times afterwards. But what is interesting about this election was that the general feeling in America is that a president should have two terms. His first term is about learning the job. His second term is about executing. So they're very powerful in their second terms. But we had two since the Second World War that did not make it. Jimmy Carter is an example, and Bush Sr. also didn't make it against Clinton. In the beginning of 2000, before COVID, it was my view that Trump will have a second term almost like a shoe-in. The economy was going very well for him, and a lot of other things were working for him. And we had this total disarray in the Democratic Party where we had about 20 candidates fighting it out, who to be the contending candidate. And then COVID came. And I think COVID became a game changer in this whole election, together with the economic impact and, of course, the personality of Trump. But I always had the feeling that he may just slip in through the electoral college system that the Americans used. But about 2 weeks before the election, I spoke to somebody in the US, and they said to me, technically it's possible, but the distance between the Biden support of about 54 to 55% and Trump that could never get over 45 to 46%, that 10% gap is just too big to overcome the electoral college impact. So in that sense, I think Biden came in as the favorite, although Rudy Giuliani still does not accept that. They're trying to fight this election, but I think English is helping us out on this one. The horse has bolted. Biden is definitely president number 46.
What type of president do you expect him to be? Because he's got a lot of damage to repair, I think.
Yeah, he will be a pair of safe hands. That's what I can say. And that is the one thing that Europe was expecting, that a lot of people in America, especially the markets, were looking for and waiting for a little bit more predictability than the unpredictability which Trump brought to America. And I think the American allies will feel much more comfortable. I think Putin will feel uncomfortable. I think the Chinese are working out how they should feel about this whole thing. But I think Trump's or Biden's biggest challenge is to manage the expectancies and the expectations of racial relations, how to get things going again and to break down the polarization. I mean, Donald Trump fueled the fires. Every time we had a riot, every time we had some form of interracial problem, what everybody expected from Trump was to be a statesman and to say the right things. But Trump just couldn't do that. His DNA was politically incorrect and fueling the fires. But now that Biden is in with his deputy Kamala Harris, which I think is a very, very qualified lady, I think their biggest challenge is firstly to manage COVID better. I think there will be more stricter arrangements vis-a-vis COVID. Secondly, to deal with the economy. And then thirdly, race relations stroke polarization in the American society. I think those three things, and it will take time to deal with the legacy of Trump, because if you look at the figures, 70 million Americans voted for Trump. So it's not as if he does not have support. And he, of course, commands a very strong Twitter following. And that's another thing. I think a lot of Americans would now expect the President of the United States to have a Twitter account, which Biden will have to look at, and Kamala Harris. They will seriously have to look at, because the one thing Trump started was almost a form of transparency in the White House. Although I was following his Twitter handle, and he was just incredible the way he communicated and the stuff he said and so on. So a little bit more.
He was actually it was actually a good argument against transparency, it would seem.
Yeah, but I mean, people they've gotten used to how he did things. And although one of the interesting facts and figures about the election is that more people voted GOP, that stands for the Grand Old Party, which is the Republican Party. More people voted for the Republican Party than voted for Trump. That's a very interesting figure, because the Republicans got seats in the House of Representatives, despite the fact that Trump lost the election. That tells you that a lot of conservative Americans, or let's call them Republicans, voted for the party rather than for the candidate. So Trump's personality played a role. The same applies to Biden. More people voted for Biden than for the Democratic Party. In other words, they took a decision saying we have to get this guy out, and the Democratic Party actually lost a seat, or lost 4 or 5 seats in the House, the ones the Republican Party gained. But the balancing act in the American politics will be the Senate. And at the moment, it's at 48-48. So it's absolutely even. 2 seats will have to be recontested early in January, and 2 senators are so-called independent. Now, in a case of a 50-50 decision in Senate, the vice president has got the deciding vote. So the Senate is going to be a very, very interesting house for the next 2 years in American politics.
That's Theo Fenton, and he's staying with us, but we're going on to our next subject now. I'm sure we're going to be discussing American politics quite a bit in the next few months still to come. But right now, a question on the lips of many South Africans that came up during the lockdown and everything that went on around it, but it's been with us for years now, and it's been asked in various forms. Do we pack for Perth? Or, you all know those. There's a new book on the market. It's called Should We Go? Should We Go? I've got the compiler, Alet Law, on the program today. Alet, welcome. Glad to have you here. And with her, because what Alet did was she got, now, first of all, to introduce Alet, she is the newsletter and engagement editor at News 24, and also PhD from UCT, I see. And I would also like to welcome 2 of the people that she invited to take part in this book, to give their views on this whole question of should we go. And one of them is Mabine Seabe. I don't know whether he's joined us yet. He's here. Mabine, hi. Welcome.
Hi, Travis. How are you, Let?
And Mabine is he says he's recently started a communications company. And but he's also, before that, he was a social commentator through various media outlets, and also director of communications for the DA. So he's been around, and he's I think, eminently qualified also to take part in this book and the discussions. And the other contributor we've got is no stranger on Week in Review, and that's Piet Croucamp, who also wrote a very interesting personal take on the whole issue. I've asked Theo Fenton to stay on as well, because, as you may have heard, he's got a son who's about to emigrate to Tasmania, and he certainly understands some of the issues around that. And he personally also lived in America for a few years. So that's our panel today. And Alet, first of all, let's start with you. How did this come about? Why did you decide on this particular issue?
Cobus, I think you said it well. This is the conversation that's always been part of South African fabric. People have been leaving South Africa forever, and I've been asking this question among family and friends for ages. But I don't know if it was because I'm now at that age where a lot of my friends are making this decision to leave, whether it is for work or for just to go travel, or lots of people my age leaving. I just became intensely aware of this topic again. So and then it was in the news again. President Ramaphosa, he was campaigning for the election, and he was speaking at on a farm nearby as Kloof, and someone asked him a question about it. And he said, that he wished that he could bring young people in the diaspora back to come make a contribution to improve South Africa. And then we had that I'm Staying Facebook group, and there was kind of a movement around that. So I just felt that it became topical again. And and then I asked all these wonderful contributors to write something for the book. And I think we ended up with a wonderfully diverse, balanced book about this question, and it's a question that weighs heavily on a lot of people for many reasons that we can discuss. And I think it gives a wonderfully balanced view on this, and it lets someone make up their own mind about whether they should go or stay at the end of the day.
It's interesting looking at all the various contributors. There's no one single reason for people, any person wanting to emigrate. It's a highly personal thing, isn't it? In the sense that some people, yes, would like to and did leave as a result of crime and violence. Others leave for jobs. Others leave simply because it's an adventure. So one must be very careful, I think, of sort of using a single brush to come up with reasons for people leaving the country.
Absolutely, Cobus. I think that's so important to this conversation. I think there's a lot of people who are bitter about those who leave. There are people who have left who have all kinds of opinions about people who have chosen to stay and who are committed to South Africa. But it really is an intensely personal decision, and you'll read that in the book as well. Every person's considerations for going or staying are different, and something that might make you stay might make me go. So it's really about your life, your circumstances. I find it's less and less about politics and ideology and that kind of thing. Young people. It is a factor, but the world has become small. It's the global village is small, so it's about opportunities and jobs and performing on an international stage and going where those opportunities are. So it's become much more about that than it is really about being negative about South Africa, even though there's lots to be negative about. But it's not necessarily about that. It's people who leave aren't necessarily negative about South Africa and the future of South Africa. It's more about the pull factors, as they say, about the opportunities that they are in the rest of the world, and that's easily achievable, and people want to make use of those, and there's no reason, I think, personally, that you shouldn't.
Mabine, Seabe, you wrote a contribution, and under the title, "It's Okay to Go, but There's a Lot Worth Staying For." Maybe you just want to give us some background on that. What's your feeling about this whole issue?
Thanks, Cobus. I think when the discussion around should we go first became something that I started talking about with friends and family and so on, was probably around my matric year in 2007. And of course, at that time, there'd been this protracted fight with Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma, and it was clear that Jacob Zuma would emerge as the president of the country. And I think that's when people started to see that political instability as a question around whether should they go, should they stay. And we've seen a series of events through those 9 wasted years where we've gone into a recession. Our economy is not where it should be. Crime is on the increase, and there was a consistent theme in all the contributors where crime was an issue. But for me, yes, I'd love to spend a few years abroad to explore opportunities to better myself, to expose myself to this global market of ours. It's easily accessible. But ultimately, there need to be people who stay and fight for what we were promised in 1994, because there's a deficit between what we were promised in 1994 and we do need to have those serious and frank conversations about race relations. We need to have those conversations about gender-based violence. We need to have those conversations about corruption and building a capable state, so that with ultimately the success of the country, of course, lies in the hands of the people. But at the end of also we need a state that's able to deliver on the promises that it makes.
Piet Croucamp, you've got a different take on this. The title to your piece was "The Good Old Days," in inverted commas. The good old days are over. And I'd like you to take us briefly through that and just take a look at, I mean, because you're very much in favor, I think, of younger people, especially in certain groups, to leave the country. Piet's muted. Peter, can you start over? Sorry, they muted you.
Yeah, but thankfully the good old days are over, because the good old days are actually now. It's not something of the past. I must say, when Alet asked me to write the chapter in the book, I thought my heart went into my shoes, thinking, okay, now I'm in a group of white people traumatized about their presence here and how welcome they feel. And I was pleasantly surprised when I eventually saw the book and see the people who contributed and read the stories. It is actually a very, very different narrative that we address. And I think it's the same narrative that you get in Ireland. I remember when I lived for a year and a half in America, there was this a whole lot of Irishmen there working with me on the building sites. We were all illegal. They were illegal like the Mexicans were illegal. And they often told me that there are more Irishmen in America or anywhere else in the world than there are in Ireland, because that's just the way they are. And I asked them, so what exactly is it? What is this the way that we are? Somebody one day said to me, it's almost this Darwinistic concept of migrating towards an environment where your conditions are perhaps more safe, or your conditions are more conducive to being what you really want to be. People are in their hearts, they are nomads, they are migrants. That from the earliest days, that's how we function. And this borders, national borders, are actually very, very unnatural. So my argument is that we have to, in some other way, allow our primitive instincts to rule in this regard. So I don't want to go anywhere. I can't go anywhere. Nobody wants me in any case. But I would like to see my children to stay in South Africa if they want to, and to go wherever they want to go if that's what they prefer to do. I want to give them that freedom, psychological freedom, that economic freedom. So I'm preparing them, if you wish, for a future where they have choices. National boundaries shouldn't contain either their minds or wherever they physically are. And I think that was important to me, is that to emphasize who we really are as human beings, as opposed to the unnatural environment created by national boundaries, that containment, which I think is unnatural to us. We should be allowed to migrate where we feel more comfortable. I'm not saying I feel uncomfortable in South Africa. In fact, I feel more comfortable than ever before. It is, sorry if I'm taking a bit of time. It's interesting to me. I've spoken recently to Flip Base, for instance, and sometimes you see the views of people that are right-wingers, very conservative people, even the racist people in South Africa. And if you ask them, they're adamant that they're staying. And very few of them want to go to Iran. They want to stay in South Africa. And if I tell them that, yes, but you're not an African, they agree with me, but they think of themselves as South Africans. And me and Max de Pre had this discussion before. I accept that if you ask black South Africans, in all honesty, whether I'm an African, they say, no, you're not an African. You're a South African, and you most likely a white South African, but you are not an African. There's a different definition for being an African. So yeah, it's how the continent defines me, it's how my fellow citizens define me, but it also is about my natural instincts of migration, my nomadic instincts, to go where I have a greater chance of survival.
It's also a question, don't you think, Piet, that many kids, if we're going to talk about Afrikaans people, white South Africans, whatever you want to call them, that thanks to the mostly advanced sort of schooling they've had the privilege of getting, it makes them more mobile as well. They can actually achieve this dream of theirs to go and live somewhere else, be accepted and compete.
Yeah, but Kobus, it's not only them. 71% of children in private schools in South Africa are black kids. They are all well equipped to apply their trade wherever they want to. And the majority of people immigrating from South Africa or working abroad are not white South Africans. It is an economic concept. The extent to which the political concept is rather limited, I think. I think it's an economic concept. We know that it doesn't have a race to it, regardless of who you are. That instinct to migrate towards conditions that not only suits you better, not only allow you to be relatively successful, but all of us, that's the nature of human beings. We think about our children. So we really prepare the conditions in our lifetime for our children. So that's our instincts when we think about these things, whether we stay or whether we go.
Do you go along with that? You're a father who's about to have one son emigrating to Tasmania.
He was muted.
Sorry to you. Sorry, your mic was muted. You can start again.
I agree in some way with Piet, but in my case, it was a little different. My studying in the US convinced me that the moment you graduate anyway, you become a world citizen. That was 30 years, 40 years ago. And one of the things my wife and I decided to do, we've got 4 children, 2 sons, 2 daughters, and we've decided each of them will have an opportunity to go abroad once they finish schooling, to give them an opportunity to decide on their own whether they want to stay or go. Because remember, this going thing started in 60, 61. It came in another wave in 76 and all those kind of things. Kobus, you would know. And my son went to England for 2 years. My one daughter went to Germany. The other one went to Holland. And my youngest son went to Sweden. Now, he almost didn't come back because internet was for free in Sweden. And that to him was a major thing. But my middle son is a typical millennial. And we had a long discussion this weekend. It's interesting that we're talking about this, and we discussed this openly. And it's a combination of about 4 factors that had convinced him and his wife. She's a physiotherapist. He's a risk manager, to consider going to Australia. The first one, of course, was the fact that she was in an incident where she got what do you call it when they take your car away from you? She was hijacked. She was hijacked in Victoria. So it was a very personal and a very traumatic experience. That's one. The second one, of course, is an economic argument where my son is saying, listen, there's not a kind of a balanced argument in terms of promotion and these kind of things. He worked for SA Breweries, and SA Breweries said to him, you can stay, but we're going to keep you on your level for the next 10 years because the national demands on promotion and these kind of things does not include you. So it's that kind of argument which Flip Base would love. And then there was a third argument and they discussed it very, very thoroughly over the weekend with us. And they said, you know what? We can never solve the problems in this country. The problems of unemployment, the problems of poverty, the problems of this. Remember, they now stay in Harry Smith, where either you have electricity or water, but you don't have both at the same time. So that experience is also one that weighs very heavily on them. And then lastly, I think COVID-19 showed us, but it was even available before the time, that with Scope and Zoom and Teams and all these kind of things, going to Australia or going anywhere is a phone call away, is a computer away. So in a sense, that is a combination of factors that convince them that it's time to go. But they're typical young South Africans. They love the country. They're very loyal. But those things just push them. The other three, the two daughters and the son, they've decided to stay and do their thing here. They've got children. They're well established and so on. But the millennials want to go.
But you touched on something there as well, and I buy into Piet's argument that people emigrating, going overseas for jobs and so on, are majority not white. But we're still, you touched on this thing there now that among the white youngsters, there is that problem that they are not part of that demographic, that people are under pressure to still promote. And surely in the long run, that's damaging to the country, isn't it, Piet? I mean, you are actually in a process of losing qualified people.
Now, Cobus, that argument applies to a lot of people in South Africa. It's also true that if you're black and young in South Africa, it's very, very hard to find employment. So the market is impenetrable to a lot of people for different reasons, I must admit. But black South Africans, young black South Africans should experience the same urge to migrate somewhere else than white South Africans. The one have the reason to say, well, I can't find a job due to certain policies. But if you look at the stats, for instance, a young white South African is 10, 15 times more likely to find employment a year or two after his qualifications than a black youngster. So it's neither here nor there, really, the reasons why it's hard to find employment in South Africa. The fact is, it is a very, very difficult economy to find employment, and it's not going to grow any soon. But I think Alet is perhaps in a better position than me, because I think she selected the people that wrote the essays in the book to tell what was the central narrative when she selected the people. What exactly was it that she wanted to unearth? Because this question about what is the motivation for people to stay or to go, to some extent, it's reflected in that choice that she had to make. Because she could say, well, let me talk about white South Africans, let me talk about young black South Africans, but it's a narrative that cuts right across a whole section of various sectors of South African society.
Alet?
Yeah, absolutely, Piet. I think, when I started thinking about who I wanted to ask to write, I wanted to ask people who could give us some insight into the future of South Africa. Really, that was where I started. I wanted to ask political analysts what they thought, where the political situation of the country is going. I wanted to ask economists. I asked journalists because I know that they live close to these spheres of power, and they know that they have information that regular people don't necessarily have. And what I ended up getting from all of these people were personal stories, which just showed me that it is a personal matter, and it affects everyone. It affects people who can go, and it affects the ones staying as well. I mean, if you just think of it from a personal family point of view, if you have children who are living overseas, it is a deeply personal issue for you, because you obviously want the best for your children, and you want them to be, as both of you have said, Theo and Piet, that you want your kids to have the choice and the freedom to go wherever. You want to set them up to be able to do that. But at the end of the day, your children are far away from you, and that affects you. So everyone has an opinion about this, but it's a personal opinion, and it's obviously based also on what you think is going to happen in the country in the next 10 to 20 years. But it's also based on your personal experiences. But yeah, it's a complex topic, because it is almost where the personal meets the political in this case. It's those personal factors, but it's also political, because South Africa's immigration story is a little bit different in the sense that, as Ferial Haffajee put so eloquently in her chapter, it's almost a bet on the future. and it's a bet that every person who has the ability to leave the country, because let's be honest, it's also a conversation among a privileged few in the country to be able to make that decision to go abroad, to find work there, have to make, do we want to stay here and commit to our country's future? And then also it's about, how are we South Africans if we do decide to stay? Are we going to be moaning and complaining about everything, or are we going to commit to making this country a better place? And those are issues everyone grapple with. As you said, it cuts across all societal groups. And I wanted to reflect that in the book when I realized that this isn't going to be a book about politics and economics and socioeconomic factors. It's going to be a book of personal stories at the end of the day, informed by all of those factors and written by people who are cognizant of all those factors.
Mabine, Seabe, your take on this, looking at what Alet just said as well. The fact is, some people say we're staying because we want to help the country overcome its challenges. Others go, and I think it's generally accepted that it's fine. If you want to go, then you go. But to keep people in the country, to help build, to help prepare, when you have a president, for instance, who, when he refers to our people, you get the feeling that he's not talking about all the people in the country. Which isn't something that actually inspires a lot of confidence. What's your take on that? And do you think that there are things that we can do to actually convince people that it might be better to stay?
I think when we went into democracy in 1994, we handed political responsibility, of course, to the ANC government, but just a democratic government as well. But at the same time, I think we took away a lot of our own personal responsibility and our civic duty to the country. And if you look like formations like the UDF,
we've lost
civic activity anymore. But we saw South Africans taking issues into their own hands, so to speak, with the Zuma Must Fall movement, where different political parties were able to be hand in hand around one mission to remove someone who's been destructive to the country, to the economy, and to people's livelihoods in general. So I think South Africans, by and large, want to stay, and they want to fight for this country because they understand the potential that this country has. And there are many criticisms that one can have of Cyril Ramaphosa, but I think we're starting to see a change in how corruption is dealt with. We're seeing state agencies that are fighting corruption and supposed to protect our democracy being empowered and so on. So I think there is some sort of hope from the political side. But at the same time, we also have a weak opposition in the Democratic Alliance, which hasn't quite decided in which direction they're going. And that is a problem as well for the...
We keep on, sorry, Mabine, we keep on losing you from time to time. I don't know whether you have a loose connection there or what. We'll be back with you in a moment. But somebody who's just asked a question here on our screen, do certain race groups feel more unwelcome than others? What is your view? I think that's more than our producer asking that and asking viewers to take part in the discussion. So let's hear what your views are. Piet, you heard what Mabine said now. Do you want to go on from there?
Yeah, I think Yolanda Andrach, she's there from Pretoria, also WhatsApp me something. I'm not sure if she watched the program, it was just coincidence, but she says that there's also questions about identity and then perhaps something more philosophically meaningfulness. And I think those questions are addressed by various authors in the book, essay writers in the book. The extent to which identity becomes sort of a containment area. You feel safe within that area, or you define yourself as something, and that inhibits the likeliness that you might migrate or move somewhere else. But also, I think if you take severe economic strain, and if there's a degree of political alienation, I remember, I think that one of the things that President Ramaphosa is doing, which I quite appreciate, is he seldomly says in Parliament, our people, because most white South Africans think, well, he's not talking about us today. So if he talks about our people, and that was a typical thing that Jacob Zuma would do, but Ramaphosa doesn't do that, because I think he has a sensitivity for the extent to which identity plays a role in the narrative about growth and development and political stability. Everything right at the heart of it might have something to do with identity. And I think I could refer to my argument again before, is the fact that we have different and often competing identities in South Africa. There are some identities that in some other way bind us together. But the fact that whites are not Africans, whether they want to be or not, or whether they think of themselves as not, you can only be an African if the majority, or if the people that you claim to be or want to be part of actually accept you. And the fact is the majority of black South Africans do not think of whites as Africans. So it does play on identity. But I've seen it first time in Namibia after independence. Most of white Namibians started to lose their political loyalty to Namibia, but they had economic loyalty. They shifted their interest to economic interest. And I think most white South Africans make the mistake sometimes by defining meaningfulness in terms of their economic stability or economic survival. So it's a very one-dimensional definition of what meaningfulness means, and they feel alienated from the political project, much more so under Jacob Zuma, and much more so under Thabo Mbeki, who made a point of referring to white South Africans as colonialists of a special kind or special type. That form of alienation plays in on the question of identity, and it also undermines the idea of meaningfulness. And I think it's a very interesting question that Yolanda asked about this. We, of course, can explore it much further.
But Piet, then let me ask you your definition. How would you sum up meaningfulness?
Well, meaningfulness cannot have an economic definition only. It cannot be if you're economically successful, if you're middle class, if you have access to good schools and access to assets. Surely those are the infrastructure, the pillars of meaningfulness to some extent. But it's also how you define the place that you live in, the extent to which you have empathy with the community that you live in. In Afrikaans, they refer to it as deernis. Surely if white South Africans in this country have a degree of deernis, empathy with poor people, with people that don't have access to that demographic dividend that white South Africans have, that defines you as a human being. You are truly defined by how you see other people as well, and how you place other people vis-a-vis yourself in society. And I think that's where meaningfulness comes in. You cannot give it the economic definition only. It's important that you think about yourself as a South African, because you have massive empathy and type of thoughtfulness about the complexity of life around you.
Alet, the one thing that comes through constantly reading through the book is that whatever, and again, I must say to viewers, this book isn't an attempt clearly to tell people not to go, or to stay, or whatever. But the one constant thing that comes through this book is you better know what you're doing. You better know why you're doing it. You really have to have your reasons well thought out. Alet?
Yeah, absolutely. That was especially clear from people who wrote, who have left, who said that, if you want to go, you must be sure that you want to go, because life will never be the same again. Immigration is hard. It's hard to leave. If it was easy, if economic factors were the only things at play here, everyone would be moving around according to where the economic opportunities were. But it's hard because you leave behind your support network, you leave behind your status in society, in your community, which speaks to that thing of identity. You lose that kind of piece of identity of, knowing your place, and people know you, and you leave behind friends and family and parents, and a place that you know, and a place that you feel safe and at home in. and it's, as I said, it's hard, but at the same time, it also goes the other way. If you want to stay, if you decide to stay, be sure why you want to stay, and don't be have an opinion. And I think that's why this book is great, because it also empowers people who want to stay and who are committed to South Africa. It gives you language. It gives you a reason to stay as well, if I can put it like that. I mean, for instance, my mother was reading the book, and she's much older, and she's obviously not going anywhere. And she said it was so wonderful for her to read that why it's also okay to stay. It's not doom and gloom all the time, and there's also lots of reasons to stay. So I think that's why the book is so great, because it gives you both perspectives. And as you say, it's not an attempt to convince anyone to go or to stay. It just gives you all those views and, to help you make a decision for yourself if you are at that crosspath in your life.
And as the author and reporter, journalist, Mandy Wiener, also in the book says, if you do decide to stay, then be part of something. Take part. Let your voice be heard. Stand up for things that are right and stand up against things that are wrong in the country. Be part of the country. Be a citizen, in other words. And that's Mandy Wiener who said that. I want to thank all our participants today. Time's flown, unfortunately. We spoke to Mabine Seabe. We spoke to Theo Venter, Alet Law, and Piet Croucamp. And this is a topic that will be coming up, I think, on a regular basis, probably, in future. And I'd like to recommend the book, if I may. Should We Go? Or in Afrikaans, Alet, I think it's Moet ek waai, as ek
Moet ek waai, yes. And if I could just add, the Afrikaans book is actually quite different. It's a different group of authors that speak to Afrikaans people. So if you prefer that, then rather grab the Afrikaans one.
Oh, there you have it. Should I Go or Moet ek waai? And the book's available. And really take the trouble to go and read it, because, as I said, it gives a very clear overview of what's important when you do start thinking about this type of thing. And one should really have that down pat before you make that decision, I believe. My name's Cobus Bester. We'll be back next Sunday at 1700 once again. Have a nice week. Bye.
Yes, you. I Love Marvel.live presents Black Friday, an on-air advertising opportunity for your business. For just 250 Rand, you can advertise your product or service on our platform for 10 minutes. And guess what? It's to an audience of 170,000 viewers. That's crazy. For more information, dial 011-718-2600 or simply email ilam.livesales@gmail.com. Increase your sales today.